Welcome to East Alabama Today, featuring topics, events, and interesting people from all over East Alabama. Hosted by Carl Brady. Now, let's get right to the show. Here's Carl Brady.
Hello everyone, welcome into East Alabama Today. I'm Carl Brady. Thanks for being with us on today's program. We'll start things off with some contact information so you know how to get in touch with us. As always, we'll give you the email address, cbrady@tv24.tv. That's the best way to get in touch with us to let us know what's going on in your community. You guys are our eyes and ears out on the street, and you know better than we do what's happening in your neck of the woods. So if you have something special going on, fairs, festivals, special events, things that are happening with your church community organization, let us know about it by sending me an email, cbrady@tv24.tv. And we also want to know about the interesting people who live in your community. Maybe you know someone who's a writer, an artist, or a musician. Maybe they have an odd or an interesting hobby and you think they'd be a great guest for the program. Well, that's exactly the folks we want to know about. So send me those emails, cbrady@tv24.tv. Now, remember as well that if you happen to miss an episode of East Alabama Today, or would like to go back and review some information or watch an episode that you missed, you can do so online at tv24.tv. Go to the on-demand section, click on East Alabama Today, and there you'll see a whole series of East Alabama Today shows that you can catch up with at your convenience. And we'll be back to start today's show in just a moment, so stay with us. Well, we welcome you back into East Alabama Today. Again, I'm Carl Brady. Thanks for being with us on the show today. We have a special guest joining us, Christy Claes-Downs. Christy, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
And Christy is with the Choccolocco Creek Watershed Alliance, and we're going to learn about Choccolocco Creek, the watershed area, what that is, and the things that the Alliance are involved with in order to keep the environment clean, basically, and some of the work that goes on with Choccolocco Creek. But for the folks who we've heard the word Chakalaka a million times, we've heard Choccolocco Creek, but kind of give me an idea, where is Choccolocco Creek? Where does it run?
The creek itself, the headwaters, the beginnings of it are up in the National Forest, in like north of Coleman Lake, and then down through White Plains and the town of Chakalaka, and then it cuts into a little bit of the Longleaf Refuge, and then actually scoops all the way down to Cheehaw Mountain, and includes Duggar Mountain, so it's really wide in one portion, and then includes all of Oxford, but the creek, basically, if you're in Oxford, you've passed over the creek on 21, but and then it goes all the way to Logan Martin Lake through Talladega County. So it's a long stretch. You know, a lot of it is in the National Forest, the headwaters area, and then a lot of it's in the urban area too, so it's an interesting creek to work with, and the watershed's very diverse. So,
what about Choccolocco Creek makes it special enough to get its own alliance to help protect the watershed area? And there are just dozens of other creeks around, but what's special about Choccolocco Creek?
There are Choccolocco Creek's exceptionally large. You know, it's one of the longest creeks in the country before it would be designated a river. So it's a really long creek, but at the same time, the biodiversity that's there, all the different numbers of species that live just in that area is unusually high. And then amongst just the different variety of species, a lot of those are endangered. And then in addition to that, you have a lot of the animals that live in there that are actually only present in certain sections of the watershed. So, you know, sometimes that happens in a lot of different watersheds, but our watershed has just a very high concentration of that going on. So we try to, you know, do things that keep water quality high, or do little projects around that can make small impacts, or, you know, work on doing any kind of restoration project that may come around, or just educating the public about dumping and trash and how that impacts you know, the area. And also Choccolocco Creek's a water supply for us too, so it's also in our best interest to keep it clean and make sure we're aware that the water cycle is continuous, and that we are part of it by drinking the water every day. So
talk about the watershed itself, and I guess for folks who are not familiar with the term, you're basically talking about the drainage area that drains into the creek. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly. In fact, the watershed area, if you look at a map, you'll notice a lot of them
We do have a map too, by the way. We'll maybe throw that up in a second.
There it is.
There it is.
that one, the boundaries of the watershed are not really clear in that map, but you'll notice that a lot of the boundaries are along a mountain ranges, so that rain hitting one side of the mountain is going to all sheaf off into one watershed, and then the other side will go to some other watershed. But basically, you said it just right. It's a drainage area, and what that means is it all drains into one point, which is Choccolocco Creek. So you don't.
So every little ditch, every little branch that runs through every little farm or every little eventually finds its way to Choccolocco Creek, which then finds its way to the Coosa River, right?
Yes, and that's, we could focus on Choccolocco Creek all day because there's so many neat things in the creek, and all the water collects there. But the reason why we focus on the watershed is just like you said, if it's all going to be draining into Choccolocco Creek, and as it's draining, picking up a lot of different stuff along the way. The point is not just to make impacts to the creek once the water's there, but make small beneficial impacts upstream by doing, trying to get people to connect rain barrels to their downspouts, or any little stormwater prevention stuff we can help with. That all helps in the long run before it even gets to Choccolocco Creek.
Well, let's talk about that and some of those prevention tips and things that people can do. The water barrels, as you mentioned, to collect the runoff from their houses. And one thing that I've learned over the years, interviewing people about developments and retail developments and things like that you may not think about, but when you take a big commercial development and you pave this giant parking lot, then you have cars running over it all day. There's rubber, there's oil, there's antifreeze and all that stuff, and when it rains, all that stuff goes into a ditch, which eventually goes into a creek or a river that's unfiltered, and so you have to think about those kind of things. Where is the water coming from when it gets to the creek? Yeah,
and I think you have to kind of displace how much impervious surface, that's your pavements, that water hits it and goes straight off. You have to kind of offset that, or try to at least with retention ponds or other ways to like have water run over riprap or grassy swaths. Or we did a rain garden up at the Cane Creek Community Garden. It was like a demo, but the idea of it was it took all the roof runoff from the facility they have out there and took it all into like a depression area that would be flooded after rain, but then it would drain after the rain. But the idea was everything would get caught in that rain garden. And the first flush, the first inch of rain has all those contaminants in it.
Right.
So if you can catch that and get it into whatever area you want to keep it trapped and contained, then you really make a big impact. So that's part of what we do too, is if we can help put a rain garden somewhere or use that as a demo to teach these types of topics to schools. And
that's why you see some of those things at major developments, the retention ponds and those kind of things. Nature does what nature does. Nature filters the water naturally until we come in and change the landscape and add things to it that makes it hard for nature to do its job. So with the retention ponds and things like that, you can capture that and hold it long enough for nature to take its course.
Exactly. And that one thing we kind of promote too is to, at least if you've got a stream running through your property or spring or you're on Choccolocco Creek, is if you can not cut that riparian buffer where all those trees and the brush is growing, it makes a huge impact to the erosion that would otherwise be happening, which is obviously causes a lot of problems. Some people are losing their land slowly over time, but then also it's a water quality problem too, expensive water quality problem. But if you can keep those trees intact, it actually absorbs a lot of that runoff, just the action of a sponge, how that would absorb your runoff. But actually, there's been studies on certain chemicals that will actually be picked up in the trees and the plants that would otherwise be going into the water. So it's just really important to teach the concept of, it may look great to have a lawn mowed up straight to the bank, but really that's not the best way to go about maintaining land or being sustainably managing a piece of property. But so we kind of talk about that a lot too, erosion control and how to work with landowners to help them, what can they do to prevent something like that on their property. And so we've done some workshops and watershed academies, which basically bring in different experts in the field to talk about erosion control and flooding and invasive species and things like that. But
But we need to take a quick commercial break, so we'll do that right now and come back in just a moment and continue talking about the Choccolocco Creek Watershed Alliance as we continue with East Alabama Today. Welcome back into East Alabama Today. We're talking about the Choccolocco Creek Watershed Alliance with Christy Claes-Downs. And Christy, a lot of what you guys do is educational. How do you reach out into the community? What are some of the things you guys are involved with to bring your message to the community?
Well, we try to just reach as many different groups as possible. So we'll go to schools, and we have an Enviroscape model that's basically a model of a watershed, and the kids can spray different fake pesticides and dirt and gasoline, and they can spray it on there and watch what happens when it rains. And so we bring that model around to schools, and actually we'll bring it to festivals and things like that where we have a booth. And actually the parents and kids get a lot out of something like that, a visual aid. But we also do things like this, where if you're not at that festival and you didn't come to our cleanup or something, maybe you'd see us on TV talking about the watershed. 2 weeks ago, we just wrapped up our first watershed conference, which we brought in 6 different speakers talking about endangered species on Choccolocco Creek, fish advisories on Choccolocco Creek, which is always a hot topic. And then talking about invasive species and different landowner assistance programs. And we brought all those speakers to come talk as a free public forum, just to come. And the idea was to get anybody. If you're a landowner or if you're a resident in the watershed, you're going to get some good free education about what's going on out there and how unique it is. I always love the presentation on all the endangered species and the mussels and the tiny little fish that, pygmy sculpin that lives in Coldwater Creek, all that kind of stuff. Trying to make a free event where the public can just come out of its own, if it's interested. And then also we'll do a lot of hiking trips on the weekends. We partner with JSU Field Schools on some hiking trips and a paddle trip. And then also we do 2 annual cleanups that get a lot of volunteers to help that are already passionate about it, but then they'll bring their families or their neighbors and they'll come back next year, or we'll get new people. So we just try and get people at any kind of way we can, just to reach out to them, get them involved. Some of the things we do, I've mentioned some of the workshops, but we also do rain barrel workshops that are free to the public. And those always fill up really fast because it's a free rain barrel, but it's also, I teach a program about why it's important to have one. So there's obviously an important educational component to having the rain barrel and why it's making a small impact. So we'll do a few of those every year. And just whatever we can to reach different sections of the population. And we move around too. The idea is not to just focus on Oxford or Munford. We do a lot of work in Munford, but anywhere in the watershed that people are living. So
talk about those endangered species. I think that's something that interests me as well, of the wildlife that depends, animal wildlife that depends on the creek, and even flora and fauna, those kind of things, that there are specific plants and flowers and animals that depend on the creek to live.
Yes, and I mentioned endemic species earlier, and that's a species that only lives in that one place and nowhere else in the entire world, and we have a few of those in Choccolocco Creek. And
that's just amazing to me.
Yeah, I know, that's why it's so interesting. Of course, I'm an animal science major. I always focus on that anyway, but early 2014, ADEM, the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, okayed an upgraded listing of Shoal Creek, which is a tributary, a smaller section of Choccolocco Creek up in the National Forest, and they listed it as an outstanding Alabama water, which was a great way to distinguish a section of the creek. It had really high water quality, and it had at least 3 or 4 different endangered species known there in that section of creek. And basically having it listed out as an outstanding Alabama water means that it kind of gets a little more distinction, but therefore a little more protection is, I think, too strong of a word, but it prevents certain things happening to that area that would make it delist it into some other quality. So something like that's really great for our watershed to highlight the sections that are doing really well. And we did a media day out there in the summertime to bring, all the different media reps, radio, TV, newspapers out there. And we had a few different biologists waiting out in the creek to pull out some of these endangered species. And it was just amazing that they're just all there, and it's very pristine, and it's great to be able to highlight a section like that. And there's only, I think there's, I want to say 6 or 7 listed in the state, and we have one of them in the watershed. So,
what's the most interesting animal or species that you've run across in the watershed as an animal science person? What really interests you the most?
I guess I always get really interested in, well, 2 different things. We have a lot of endangered, there's just a lot of mussels and snails in the creeks in the Coosa River, but the mussels themselves are such good water filterers, and I read somewhere they filter a gallon of water per hour.
Oh, wow.
And so they're really essential to the water quality itself. They're a good sign. If they're there in good numbers, it's a good sign that you have good water quality, but also them being there, they're almost just acting like little filters in the water, and I always think that's so cool. I couldn't tell you, they all look really similar to me, so I couldn't go out there and tell you what kind I was looking at, but the endangered species in Coldwater Creek, the pygmy sculpin, is tiny little fish, and it only lives in the springhead area on Coldwater Creek. And to me that's really interesting because the water temperature there in Coldwater is, I think, always around 70 degrees, which is 5 or 6 degrees colder than Choccolocco Creek, and it just stays right there, and it knows that that's where it belongs. And the interaction between some of these fish species and the mussels is so interesting because that's how a lot of these mussels reproduce, is they get into the gills of these fish and then move around that way and breed via fish gills. And I always think that's just interesting, the interrelation.
Everything works together,
you have to have that kind of fish that's going to carry that kind of mussel egg. Or spawn around, and it's just amazing to see the interaction, the interconnectivity of everything. It's so small but important, and you'll lose a species if you lose this one. So and why, and that kind of leads to why it's important to protect these species. A lot of people say it's just a little fish that lives in this one little place, who cares? Why do we care? I think we want to care as a whole. There are a lot of people that don't care about the little pygmy sculpin, or they'd rather, it's not a big deal. We'd rather have this going on still and say goodbye to the fish. But I think if we continue that kind of mindset, in the end, we're not going to benefit from that mindset, because if a fish can't survive, and then you have a whole population of something that can't survive, and then you have this whole ecosystem that can no longer survive, it's going to branch out to the point where it impacts our quality of life, because we like to have wildlife around, but then also, are the reasons why these animals aren't surviving because we're not treating the water properly, or so I think of it as, well, it's a step one. Not everyone's going to care about it, but if you look at the long run, through a chain of events, it's going to impact us eventually if we don't watch out for it, or make sure we're checking on certain populations. How is it doing? How is the water doing? How are these populations of mussels doing? Because the canary in the mine shaft, if those aren't doing well, there's a bigger picture happening. So,
talk about responsible recreational use of the creek. That's getting to be more and more popular. People taking paddling trips, kayaking, canoeing, tubing, those kind of things. Talk about a responsible way to use the creek in our waterways.
Well, I think it's important to also note you have to use a public access point, or if you're, I guess you could know someone with some land you could get into. But I know there are some problems with people entering illegitimate access ways to the creek, so you want to make sure you use a proper creek access. There's the tubing business on Choccolocco Creek, and Highway 77 bridge is always a great takeout or put in, depending on how you want to go. But the biggest concerns, I guess, you want to make sure you're aware of is the water levels and how much volume's flowing through there. If you're up in the higher area, there are some rapids. So you have to be a little more knowledgeable. You wouldn't just go out there not knowing what to expect. And also snags, you have some trees that fall over and block the creek. So certain areas are a little more known for that. I want to say the stretch north of Oxford and up that way, may have a lot more of that going on. So you want to make sure you kind of know what you're getting into when you go out there.
Yeah.
As you get down lower, it's wider, it's slower, deeper. That's where we do our paddle trips, is kind of on the lower end there, below Jackson Shoals. And actually, Jackson Shoals, that area down there, they do not recommend you take anything over that dam. There's lots of old rebar sticking up from the old dam that you can't see.
And these creeks, a lot of these creeks have these little low head dams and things where they were used for grist mills or something like that. 100 years ago, some of those dams and some of that structure is still in place on the creeks.
Exactly. So, if you're an avid paddler or you paddle the creek a lot, you're going to know about that section, but you wouldn't just throw your boat in there not knowing some of that stuff, because there are sections that can be dangerous. But
and you want to be careful too of, if you're taking a paddling trip, you got a bunch of friends, you're going to be taking food, snacks, and things like that, and you don't want to just be throwing that stuff in the water. Be responsible with it.
That's the other thing. When we do our paddle trip, we'll actually paddle upstream just below the dam, and that's a popular area for people to go down and fish and camp illegally, but they're camping there anyway, and there's usually a lot of trash out there. So when we do our paddle trips, we always bring bags, and I think last time we did it, we picked up like 9 or 10 bags, mostly recyclable stuff, and we recycled it. But there can be a lot of trash, and that's something we try to incorporate into anything we do. We're not going to get out there and see a bunch of trash, turn around and leave. So, but yeah, you want to pack everything back in, take it back with you, and you can get those mesh bags. You tie them into your boat that let water in and out, but don't let your trash out. So things like that are good to have, and you can get those. I know we're actually the Land Trust. Who I work with. We're actually getting some up for the Terrapin Creek for the same reason. There's a lot of outfitters out there trying to get people to use those on their boats instead of having a plastic bag, and then the plastic bag ends up in the water, and
it creates all kinds of other problems for the animals there. Absolutely. But we need to take another commercial break. We'll come back with a quick wrap up in just a moment, so stay with us. Well, time to wrap things up here on East Alabama today. We've been talking about the Choccolocco Creek Alliance and the watershed area of Choccolocco Creek. Christy, you guys have a great website that's got a lot of information on it.
We do. We got a new website, and it looks really cool. There's a watershed video on it that explains why watersheds are important. But right now we're syncing our research database, so it's not on there quite yet, but it's got our maps on there and a lot of different links to some of the recreational things you can do in the watershed. It's also got all contact information if you want to get involved. It has our event listings on there, and you can actually register for these events online. So, which is a nice component. Someone doesn't have to go send an email or make a phone call. They can sign up online. And right now, I'm trying to think if there's anything on there now. We just finished our conference, so we were working hard on that one. But yeah, visit our website. And we also have a Facebook page which has a lot of news updates, things going on in the watershed, or also it's a way of signing up for things or getting involved. So
and people can get involved. You guys are an organization of volunteers, and the more people, the better, and more projects you can work on.
Yeah, I'm the staff member, I'm the coordinator, but everyone who comes is a volunteer, and we've got. The idea was to get a lot of different members from different backgrounds that would come, and when we have a meeting, really talk about some cool opportunities we can get involved in. So if you're interested in the creek, you're passionate about it, and you also could lend the group something, like you're good at something, or you would like to participate in some way, then we really want you to get involved and help us towards our mission of improving and promoting and protecting the watershed. So we meet every other month, and email me or call me if you're interested or want to know about the upcoming events, or if you have an idea for an event. We're really just kind of open to as much as we can do for outreach and new projects and things like that.
Okay, well, that website, you saw it on the screen there, was ChoccoloccoCreekAlliance.org. So go there and check that out for all the details and all the contact information as to how you can get involved as a volunteer with the Choccolocco Creek Alliance. And Christy, thank you so much for being with us on the program. And folks, we thank you for joining us as well here on East Alabama Today. We'll see you next time.